Hello again and welcome back to another FMOD and Unity tutorial where today we're doing something nice and simple. We are looking at setting up a quick and dirty debug tool for when you're playing three-dimensional sounds so that in the game and in the editor of Unity you can actually see where your sounds are being played. So as you can see, I've set up really quickly what's meant to be a forest. This is the best I can do to make trees. I'm not very good at making things in games, as you can see. But what I have done with the forest is that I'm gonna have a bird chirping sound playing. I've created that sound and imported it into FMOD. So I've just got this event here called bird. It's just a simple three-dimensional event. When I play the event, we just hear a bird chirping, okay? So it's nice and easy. What I'm gonna do is in Unity, I'm going to attach it, or play that event rather, through one of two scripts, as you can see here on the right-hand side. What the game object, or what these scripts are going to do is it's going to pick a random position in this forest to move the object to and play the bird sound from, and then it's going to play the bird. That's great, you know, I've got a bird somewhere in my forest, but what if I want to know where it is? Well, what I'm going to do is show you these scripts and show you how I've set up some, like I say, really quick debug tools, so we can actually see, whilst we're playing the game and in the editor of Unity, where this bird is being played from. Now, before we look at the scripts themselves, I can quickly demonstrate to you what I've set up. So let's start with this script I've called event instance. I will look at these scripts in a second. The reason why it's called event instance is because that's the method I'm using to play the bird sound through FMOD's APIs. I'll talk about that in a bit more in a bit. But as you can see, I've got this option here to select my event. So I've chosen my bird event already. That's good to go. And I've also got this little toggle box here called debug. So by ticking this, that is going to show me where the bird is going to play from. If in the scene tab, if I zoom in, let's see if I can find what's just appeared quickly. There we go. So it's this orange sphere. So this orange sphere represents the location of this game object and thus where the bird's going to play from, right? Once we get the game running and we actually play the sound, what's going to happen is this sphere is going to turn from orange to green to tell us that the sound is actually playing. Now, important to note, the reason why we're able to see it in the scene tab and even in the game tab is a little bit too far, but you can kind of see the orange dot there. The reason why we can see it is because we've got this button here on both tabs enabled called gizmos. As you can see, if I turn that off, we can't see the sphere and thus we can't see the location of our bird. So in order for this to work, just make sure you've got your gizmos on. There's also a drop-down menu as well for you to change some settings for your gizmos. Gizmos being just like little visual tools that allow you to see where things are in Unity. Now, as you can see, I've actually got the name of my two scripts here, Event Instance and PlayOneShot. They've actually appeared in the Gizmos drop-down tab. So if I was to untick the box here, you can see the circle's gone. So just make sure, if you're not seeing the sphere, just make sure to check this and make sure the script is enabled and the actual gizmos button is on. Okay, so with all that in mind, I'm going to quickly zoom back out of my forest so you can see it from a distance. Make sure my debug is enabled, which it is. I'm going to click off the bird so we don't know where it is. And then let's play the game and see where it ends up. Okay, so here we are in the game. I can see my sphere in the distance, so I'm going to approach the forest and see if we can hear this bird. There we go. So there it is. Quick little bonus tip for you that I just discovered in editing this video actually. If you want to see the name of the game object that's playing your sound, what you can do is come over to the Inspector tab with your game object selected, and you can click on this little box here, select one of these rectangles. I'm going to choose the blue one, and as you can see, it's going to display the name of the game object. It's kind of small there, but when you, oh, there we go, that's a bit better. When you come to walking around your game, you should see the name of the game object on top of the sphere that tells you whether or not the sound's playing or not. So I'd recommend, if you can, trying to give the name of your game object something relevant. So instead of just bird, it could be bird sound effect, for example, so we know that this is audio related. Great, so we know that works. I think it's time now to dive into the script and learn how I've set this up. So I'm going to quickly right click on the event instance script and click edit script. Okay, so the first thing I've done is I've got a public event reference variable, okay? In order for this to work, you have to write fmodunity.event reference and then give it a name, and so I've called mine bird event. By creating an event reference variable, that allows us to get one of these nice little search tools in the Inspector tab of Unity. So that's how I'm able to select the event that I want to play, which is the bird sound. In order for this to work, it has to be public. If it's not public, it's not going to display in the inspector, so remember to add that. And yeah, that's how you get the event up. The next public variable is our debug toggle box. This variable is of the Boolean type, which means it can either be true or false. Called it debug because that's kind of what it is. It's a debug tool. It allows us to test things out in the game. I'm starting its value at false, as you can see here, by writing equals false. So all that means is when the debug tool first appears in Unity itself, it's going to start like that, disabled. So I can change that now in the inspector tab by ticking it, and now it'll be set to enable or true. And just like with the event reference variable, this also needs to be public so we can see it in Unity. But here are a couple of variables we don't want to see in Unity, or rather we don't need to. So as you can see, I've set these to private, so they're nice and hidden. Now the first one is an event instance variable. So just like the event reference, it's coming from FMOD, it's part of FMOD's API. In order to create an event instance variable, we have to write FMOD.studio, these two namespaces here. And then I've given it a name called bird event instance. So this is going to basically hold an instance or a copy of my event in FMOD. Okay, so the last variable we've got is a private float. I've called this timer because this is going to act as a timer later on in the script. As you can see, it's a float variable. So float variables allow you to store numbers, specifically numbers with decimal points. So because we're going to be increasing this variable by a very small amount each frame, we need this to be a float variable. Cool, so there's our variables out of the way. Let's quickly look at the start function. So as you can see, I've got some logic here that's basically randomizing the position that the game object is going to be starting in when the game starts. So the start function runs on the very first frame of the game. I'm creating 3 more float variables, one called X, one called Y, and one called Z. I'm going to use these to kind of represent coordinates, basically, in my three-dimensional world. And then as soon as I'm creating these variables, I'm giving them unique values. Anyway, that's not what we came for. What we're interested in is the sound. So going back to our bird event instance variable, remember this is going to hold a copy or an instance of our sound. So in order to give it a instance of our sound, you have to write this big long-winded line of code. You have to write fmodunity.runtime manager, which is a class. It's a script you kind of import when you import FMOD's API. And then you're going to use the create instance function that belongs in the runtime manager. And then what you're going to do is you're going to tell it what event in FMOD that you want to create an instance of. So I want to create an instance of my bird event. So as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm feeding the bird event into my create instance function. So now I've got a single instance of my bird event. Cool. Now, the bird event, as we know, is a three-dimensional event. And the reason why it's three-dimensional is because in FMOD, it's got this spatializer component attached to it. And this basically will change the volume, I suppose you could say, of the event based on how far it is from your listener component. And in case you don't know, the listener component needs to, well, it doesn't have to, but 9 times out of 10, it's probably go on your camera. So as you can see, this is my camera object in Unity, and it's got this component here, FMOD Studio Listener. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but the point I'm trying to make is that whenever you're trying to play a three-dimensional sound using FMOD in Unity, you need to tell your game where it's going to play from. And by doing that, FMOD's API, but what your game will do, what Unity will do, is it will find the location of the main camera, which again has our studio listener component, essentially acts as your player's ears. It will find the position of it, and then it will find the position of your sound, and then based on its distance, it will lower it in volume, and also it will pan it for us so we can hear it in a specific direction. So the way we tell our game where our bird sound is going to play from, well, there's actually 2 ways, but the one I've used, because it's a lot easier, is I've used this function called attach instance to game object. Clues in the name there. The instance we created on this line here, I'm attaching to my game object. So essentially, I'm attaching it to this game object here, my bird game object, which you can see with these arrows here. If that bird object moves, which we know it will, it's going to randomly move as soon as the game starts, the sound is going to move with it. It's attached, okay? So it's a nice, easy way to give a 3D sound a location. The way it works, you write the FMOD Unity namespace, Again, we want to access the runtime manager, and then we write dot attach instance to game object, and then we need to give it two pieces of information. First, we need to give it the instance we created. So obviously that's the bird underscore event underscore instance variable. The second piece is where it's going to play from, specifically what game object. In order to tell it, I've written game object.transform. So that's a nice real quick way to say, play this sound at the same location as this game object, the game object I've attached my script to that I'm currently writing in, okay? So again, wherever that game object goes, the bird sound's gonna follow. So that's the setup done. Let's have a tiny quick look at the update function. So this is our timer. This is really the focus of the video. But as you can see, the timer variable we created and looked at earlier that starts at 0, this is another way of saying every frame, take our timer variable and add the time it took between each frame. So let's say it took 0.02 seconds in order for the first frame to process. Well, that number is going to be added to the timer. That will keep happening 60 times a second, and thus we get a timer, right? So that's basically going to count up as the game runs. Now I've got an if statement here. So every frame, this if statement is going to run, and it's checking to see if the timer is ever greater than the value of 4. If it is, then what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, 4 seconds have just run. I would like to play that bird sound. I'm going to look at that in a second. And then also reset the timer. So as you can see, the timer is going back to 0. So it gets reset, then the next frame runs, and time is no longer greater than 4 anymore. So yeah, now we have to wait another 4 seconds in order to play our bird sound. So that's a real quick, dirty way of creating a timer. Now what it's doing is it's playing, or it's triggering this function whenever it is greater than 4 seconds, which I've created, called play bird sound. As you can see, this is that function here. So I've called it play bird sound. It's only doing one thing. What it's doing is it's accessing our event instance, which we created earlier, and it's telling it to play by using the start function. So you just type dot start, 2 brackets and a semicolon. Cool. So how do we see that sphere so we know where it's playing from? Well, that's where this function comes in. So this is the onDrawGizmos function. So this is a function that is built into Unity's API, and it allows you to, well, draw stuff basically. You can draw shapes, you can draw sort of wireframes of basic shapes, and you can then put those shapes in your game world and you can see stuff, and it's really handy for, well, testing things out like we're doing here. So in a similar way to the update function, this function runs a lot. It's basically doing the same thing. It's kind of running every frame, but not just when the game is playing, when we are in Unity's editor as well. It's constantly being run. Now the first thing I'm doing is I've got an if statement. So I'm checking to see if that debug variable is ever equal to true. So by just writing its name, that's another way of saying, is this variable 2? Remember, that's the variable up here that could be either true or false. Cool, so if it is true, if we have ticked that box, what do we want to do? Well, we want to check to see if the sound is playing, and if it is, we want to display one of 2 spheres. How do we check if it's playing? Well, FMOD comes with this handy tool. This is called a playback state. Now, the playback state tool is what's known as an enumerator. Don't worry too much about what that means. It basically means it has predefined values that are written, they're words basically, but they mean certain things to our game and FMOD's API and our code, right? So the predefined values that playback state can be are 1 of 5. Either playing, let's see if I can remember it. Playing, played. I tell you what, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to find out. Let me quickly do this. Here we go. So this is a tiny list of what it can possibly be. So it can either be playing. That means the sound is playing. Starting. That means that the game is trying to play your sound. It's not playing yet, but you've told the sound to play, and your computer's just processing it, basically. Stopped is stopped, it's not playing. Stopping is similar to starting. You've told the event to stop, but it's processing. It might even be fading out. So if it's fading out over a long time, then it's considered stopping. And finally, sustaining. Sustaining is a bit of a, not a weird one, but it's a specific one. So in FMOD, you've got a tool. I'll quickly show you this. I keep getting distracted. You've got a tool called a sustain point. So I can put a sustain point in here, and what will happen is if I play the event, it will stop at this sustain point until I key it off, until I tell it to play again. If it's ever stuck at this sustain point, then the playback state will be set to sustaining, okay? So you can check for that as well. Okay, so as you can see, I've created a playback state and I've called it state. What I want to do is I want to take my event instance and I want to basically find out its playback state. I want to take its playback state value and output it into this variable so that I can then read this variable, find out if it's playing, if it's stopped, whatever. How do we do that? Well, we use another new function called the getPlaybackState function. Now, the way this works is you start by you typing the name of your event instance variable. Then you write .getPlaybackState, which activates the function, it tells it to run. And then what you want to do, like I say, we want to output its information into our state variable that we just created. So the way you do that is within the brackets that follow functions, is you write the keyword out. Cool, so next we've got the state. So now that we've got a state and a value for that state, remember it's read our event instance at any given moment in the game, and it's found out whether it's playing, starting, stopped, etc. Now we want to check it. So again, we use an if statement. So we say, right, take our state variable and we want to compare it to a value. We want to say if this state is ever playing, is the event ever playing? And the way we do that is we write out one of those 5 values. Now this might look long-winded, but one way you could, to help you visualize this, another way of interpreting this is we're basically trying to say, does that state ever equal playing, okay? We could also, you know, obviously there's other options. We could say, is it stopped? We can't write it out like this, however. All you need to know is that in order for this to work, you have to write fmod.studio.playbackstate. And then one of those 5 values, so playing. Moving on. So if the state is playing, if the game object is playing, what do we want to do? We want to draw a sphere and we want to draw a green one specifically. So the way this works is, well, first let's set the color of the sphere. That's the first thing you want to do. The way you do that is you write gizmos.color and you set it to color dot followed by a particular color. Now there is a limit. You can't just you can't write magenta or something crazy. There's a few options. We've got black, blue, clear, cyan, grey, green, blah, 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 blah. So just type green and hit a semicolon. Now that we've set our color, we want to draw our sphere. So that's when we write gizmos.drawSphere. In order for this to work, it needs 2 pieces of information. Where is it going to play the sphere and how big is the sphere going to be? In order to tell it where to play, I've written transform.position. How big is it going to be? Well, you need to give it a radius. I've set mine to 0.3. Adjust this number if you want, make it bigger, make it smaller. As you can see, I've got an else statement, the counterpart to the if statement. So when the if statement runs, it's like we've established, it's going to check to see if our event is playing. If it's anything other than this, if it's doing anything other than playing, i.e. it's not playing, then the else statement will trigger and it will do this stuff, what's in the else statement. So as you can see, the color I'm now setting to yellow, and I'm setting the sphere to the same location, but I'm changing the size slightly. So it's just going to get a little bit smaller. Just again, another way to separate it from the playing sphere. That's it basically. That is the main way that you can, display a little sphere whenever your sound is playing. Now, as we've established, this is using event instances, okay? So event instances, very common tool in FMOD, but it's not the only tool that we can use to play sounds. We can also play sounds with the PlayOneShot and the PlayOneShot attached function. Now, as you may have noticed, I've actually got a second script here called PlayOneShot. So let's have a look at that script and see how that is set up. Now, for the most part, this script is very similar to the last. Like I said, it serves the same role, basically. The difference is that we're playing the sound with the PlayOneShot function. Now, what is the PlayOneShot function? It's a really quick and dirty way of playing a sound from FMOD. All you need is an event reference, and then you just type PlayOneShot, give it the event reference, where you want to play it, and you're good to go. So here we go, just like last time. I've got a function called playBirdSound. This line of code here, let's just separate it. This line of code here, this is what's playing the sound. This is it. That's in theory all we need to play the sound. So by writing fmodunity.runtimemanager.playOneShot attached, giving the function my event and telling it where to play. So in this case, I'm telling it to play on the game object. The sound will now play whenever the playBirdSound function is called. And again, it's just on a simple timer. Now, the reason why we can't do the exact same thing we did last time, which was use the playback state tool to access whether or not a PlayOneShot is working, is playing, is because it doesn't work with PlayOneShot, sadly. Playback states only work with event instances. So we need to come up with a new way to check when our sound is playing. Now, the way I've decided to do this is to use this tool here. So as you can see, I've created a variable, a local variable, because it's within the start function. So on the first frame, it will be created and then destroyed straight away once it's finished. And it is of the event description type. This is another tool from FMOD, and I've just called it event description. Nice lazy name. Now, an event description variable allows us to access information about a particular event. So what you do is you create your variable, like I've done here, and then you need to tell it what event in FMOD do you want to get the description of. So we know that's our bird event. So in order to give it our bird event, you have to write fmod unity.runtime manager.get event description, and then give it the name of, or rather give it a event reference variable that has your event in. Cool. So now we've got event description, specifically the description of our bird event. Within that variable is information about it. So how do we access that information? And also, what information do we want? Well, what I want to know is I want to get the length of the event. So you can see on this line here, line 25, I'm accessing my event description variable, and I'm writing .getLength, and then I'm outputting a value into another variable here, which we'll talk about in a sec. GetLength will get in milliseconds the length of your event. So let's go back to FMOD very quickly. We can take a look at where it ends. It ends at about 2.6 seconds, okay? So knowing that we can get the length of our event, my plan is to play my sound, start a new timer, and then say, well, after this 2.6 seconds is up, I know that the sound is no longer playing, and thus I can change the color of my sphere. Now, it has to output integer data. So far we've looked at float numbers, which can be decimal places. Integer data cannot. It has to be whole numbers. So that's why I've created this event length integer variable. As you can see, it's of the integer data type. The function getLength, it outputs in milliseconds, not seconds. So it's a little bit awkward and definitely worth bearing in mind. So this variable is going to be whatever 2.6 seconds is milliseconds. I think it's like 2,600, okay? Now that's fine, I guess, but not really what we want. We want to work in seconds. So once we've done that, as you can see, I'm taking the getLength integer variable, dividing it by 1,000, and by doing that, we're now in seconds. So what I'm doing is I'm then inserting that number into a new variable called event length. And this is what we're going to use to check the length of our event. Cool, so we've got that data. Now, what do we want to do with it? Well, let's have another look at the play bird sound function and the function underneath it, track event playback. So this function is an IEnumerator function. Now, these functions are a bit funky. The reason why I'm using this is because I want to use this function here, wait for seconds. Now, this is like I'm basically creating another timer, similar to this one in the update function. But this one works slightly differently, and I wanted to show you how it works because it's quite useful. Imagine this, right? That what happens is this function plays and it will do what we tell it to. So on a certain frame, it will trigger and it will set the event is playing variable, which is a new variable I've created, which we're going to check later on to see if our event is playing or not. It's going to set it to true. Then it's going to pause using this function. It's going to pause for a specific amount of time, okay? So as you can see, wait for seconds. That's why we needed that number in seconds. I'm giving it our event length. So for 2.6 seconds, this function is going to pause but still exist. Then once the 2.6 seconds are up, the last line is going to run, event is playing, is going to then switch back to false. So whenever we play our event, we can trigger this function at the same time, which will then in turn set that variable for 2.6 seconds. Then if I scroll down, as you can see in our onDrawGizmos function, instead of checking a state, because we've got no state to check, we are now checking the event is playing variable. We're saying if that's true, then we want to create a green sphere. Else, if it's not true, and thus false, we want to create a blue sphere. Now, how do we tell this function to play? We're going to do it here. Let me quickly get rid of this line temporarily, because it's just easier if I explain it this way, focusing on this line first. So we play our function using PlayOneShot attached, and then straight away we tell tracked event playback to play. As you can see, the first thing we're doing is starting the coroutines. This IEnumerators, when they're triggered, they're considered coroutines. Don't worry too much about what that means. But we are starting it. We are telling it to play. So to do that, we write start coroutine, and then inside brackets, we give it the name of our function, which is track event playback, okay? But as you can see, we've also got a variable here, which is being set, okay? We're kind of storing an instance, a copy of this function, which is active, which is, setting our variable and then waiting for 2.6 seconds. We're taking that and we're storing it in this variable. Now, this is a variable I created at the top of the script here. It's called event playback tracking, and it is of the coroutine type, a very specific class, basically. Oh, but don't worry too much about what that means. All you need to know is that it's holding that function in place for us. It's a way of us accessing that function whilst it's triggered and whilst it's holding, or waiting rather, for 2.6 seconds. It's also being set to null here. That basically just means I'm declaring the variable, but it's empty, okay? It's empty until we play a sound. So anyway, we play our sound and then we start the coroutine, okay? Now, let's say that our timer was not checking, it was not resetting every no, let me say that again. Now, let's say that we weren't playing our bird sound every 5 seconds. Instead, we were trying to play it every 1 second. Now, we know that the event in FMOD is longer than 1 second. It's 2.6 seconds. So what that would mean is we play the sound, but also we trigger our coroutine every 1 second. However, it's waiting for 2.6. So what we want to do, a safe way to sort of handle this messy situation, is we kind of want to kill, if we want to kill this, we want to stop it basically. If this is in the middle of its count, its wait for seconds function, and we're trying to trigger our event to play again, we want to interrupt this, kill it, and start again. Now, the way we do that is with that line of code I removed. So before we tell our event tracking playback coroutine to start, we check to see if event is playing. If this is already true, which means obviously that the coroutine has started, so if the coroutine started and the event is playing, we want to stop it. Then the way we do that is write stop coroutine, and then in brackets, we give the name of our variable. This is something worth comparing. The way we stop a coroutine and start a coroutine are in a sense the same, because we've got these functions called start coroutine and stop coroutine. But this one takes a variable, okay? A variable holding this function, whereas start coroutine just takes the function itself, okay? So that tripped me up when I first learned about these. So I want to just highlight that for you. But yeah, with that, we're pretty much done. As we can see in the onDraw gizmos function, our main function for using our debug tool, like I said, if the event is playing, draw a green sphere. If it's not, draw a blue sphere. We're done. And that's how you basically display a little sphere if you're using the PlayOneShot function in FMOD, or if you're using event instances to play your sounds. Hopefully that's helpful. Really sorry if this video dragged on. I promised myself it'd be a short one, and of course it's not. Of course it ends up me chewing your ear off for however long this has been. But hopefully this has been helpful for you. Yeah, thanks a lot for watching. This is the first video I've done in ages. I'm so glad I finally cracked on and got one done. Let me know your thoughts, as always, anything you want to share, what do you want to see from the channel. Also, if you have been commenting on the channel recently, I'm really sorry I've been ignoring your comments. I am a fool for doing so, and I'll try my best in the future to get back to you and read them. Yeah, I hope it's been helpful. Like I say, I've been Henry Scott. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.